I'm trying to not judge these people and love them, but I'm also trying to hold to my convictions and trying to hold to my values. And I don't want to be like the weird one, the odd one out.
Sometimes it's just asking a question of why do you believe what you believe? And that's showing the most love.
Yeah.
It's not proving that you're right.
Yeah.
If you come in and just with that bulldozing truth, it's going to cut off the relationship at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then that's what's going to create this like hostile work environment or this awkward work environment.
Welcome back to the New Life Young Adults podcast. My name is Abel. We've got Zach and Lauren joining us today. We've got an exciting conversation today. Past couple of weeks, I've been having a lot of conversations with people just pretty organically, talking about what it's like working in a secular environment. The pros with that, the cons with that, the blessing that could be, and honestly, just the difficulty that can be at times. And so we thought, man, why not address this and kind of press into this a little bit more, maybe discuss, encourage, help in any way that we can. You know, we're about adding value to your life. And so we hope that this conversation as we, and you know, we obviously don't work in secular environments. And so we want to disclaimer that, but at the same time, we have probably worked, at least I've worked in secular environments. And so, you know, we definitely want to speak into it, at least join the conversation. We may not have all the answers, but we want to join in on the conversation on what that's like. So if you'd like and you want to drop a comment and share with us your experience at some point when you're hearing this, maybe now in the podcast, just like quick little sentence or two on what your experience is like in working in a secular environment. We'd love to pray for you. We would love to reach out if you'd like us to. But yeah, I'm excited for the conversation. I know it's pressing on a lot of people's hearts. And so maybe just what's been your guys' experience working in secular environments? Now we work at, you know, New Life Community Church, but before you're working in the church context, what jobs did you guys have and what was that like for you guys?
I can start.
Yeah.
So I graduated high school and then I worked at a retail store.
Nice.
And,
what retail store?
There's a reason I said a retail store, in case more of my story comes up. But it's a clothing store, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Uh-oh.
This was high school, Lauren, or post high school.
Post high school, post high school. And I worked there for
hilarious.
I think a year and a half or so. And then after that, I worked as a nanny for a family who they weren't Christian. And then I went into mission.
Okay, cool. Sweet.
Nice. Yeah. My experience is kind of interesting because I've actually had a lot of jobs in Christian environments, but that doesn't mean, what I've realized is that doesn't mean that everyone in those environments are Christian or share the same values.
Okay.
And so I have had a couple jobs.
Chick-fil-A.
Like Chick-fil-A, you never know who's handing you your chicken nuggets. You know what I'm saying? No, but like, for example, I worked carpentry at my school, my grad school in Trinity.
Build me a
You did it.
chair,
No.
would you?
I was a carpenter.
You're a handyman?
Kind of. I mean, I like, I learned a lot on the job. I didn't know a lot of what I was doing, but I learned a lot. The guy I worked with, so I was like this guy's apprentice, basically. Assistant is it's a better word. But this guy was like deeply, deeply critical of Christianity, deeply skeptical, like all these things. So it was interesting. I was in class, like learning about scripture and theology and ministry and all these things. And in my job throughout the week, I would be spending close, intimate time with this older man who's just like, you know, grumpy and like would have all these like challenges and stuff like that. So, I've had some experiences like that. And I've also worked like in smaller situations. I've never worked in an office space that was like not a Christian environment, but I've had like smaller jobs where I've been one-on-one or like in really small groups with people who didn't believe the same as I did. And then in Christian spaces where I'm working with people who might not share the same values or beliefs. So yeah, that's kind of my experience, is like these small jobs here and there and navigating that.
Nice. Yeah, I graduated from high school. Well, in high school, I got my first job. I was like 16. Worked at a restaurant right across the street from where I lived. Super nice. My first 2 years of working, fun fact, didn't spend $1 on gas. because both my jobs were walking distance. So it was super cool.
Wow.
Yeah. So the first one I did was I worked at a restaurant as a dishwasher and a busboy. And that was an extremely secular environment. If you ever worked in a restaurant, man, them cooks, they can get rowdy sometimes. So that was an interesting experience as a 16-year-old boy. And just like learning and like being exposed to the workforce for the first time, and like being a Christian, because I was a Christian at that point, and like very very in my faith and walking it out, but then like being in this environment where I'm like, okay, I'm learning how to work and have a work ethic, and I want to make money, but now I'm like around these dudes who like are not Christian by any means. And then after that, I had a summer camp counseling job just on the street during summertime, my first full-time job. And that was a little bit more toned down because you're around kids all day. So like people couldn't be acting a fool, right, and saying crazy stuff. So, and then after that, I worked at Chick-fil-A, worked at Chipotle, did some other like jobs, side job, I cleaned pools for a little bit. But that was like chill because I was by yourself and you're not with anybody. So that was really cool. Actually, it was just hot. But yeah, that's been kind of my experience. What have you ever found yourself like feeling maybe a little overwhelmed by the environment that you're in when you're working? And I say that, and I ask that because I've talked to a lot of people who have felt like overwhelmed, have felt like I'm trying to not judge these people and love them, but I'm also trying to hold to my convictions and trying to hold to my values. And I don't want to be like the weird one, the odd one out. And I don't want them to feel uncomfortable because I have different beliefs and different values. So what has that experience been like? How have you balanced that convictions and compassion in your environments?
Well, I've never personally felt a sense of overwhelm. So I mean, I've talked to people who can, and I can share from that. But if you have that experience, it'd probably be better for you to go first.
I forgot to I just remember like all these memories came flooding back. I actually worked in a catering company for a little while. And so similar to the kitchen arena, like people are just very like quick to be mean, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
And I remember just feeling so overwhelmed because we would work really long hours. And I think I was like 16, maybe 17. I'm 17. And we would do weddings, and like we would cater these weddings, and they would be just like, I mean, the things that people would talk about and the way that like people would treat each other. And it was just like my first time, besides camp experiences where it was like unpaid and it was just volunteering, that of like the real world and what it is. So yeah, I was quite overwhelmed at 17 going into that sort of like work environment. But I also, and this is where I want to encourage anyone who is 17 or 18 and like getting a job or looking at getting a job, is like, you just have to have low expectations. I know that sounds horrible, but I had this high expectation, like I have a job and it's the best job and I'm getting a paycheck and I have a boss. And then you get there and you're like, this is nothing of what I thought. This is really hard. People are really mean. Like people pick on you because you're young, and it's just ruthless sort of.
Yeah, it is.
And you just have to be like prepared for that and know that it's not going to be all like pretty with people that are kind to you, unfortunately. Like, so yeah, that would be my experience. I didn't really, in those moments, I didn't really like have a passion because I was like 17 and I was just like trying to make it,
Yeah, that's a good thing interesting thing to bring up. I just remembered a sense actually where I did have a sense of overwhelm. One of my first jobs was it was a seasonal job, and I was an usher at a concert venue in California. Really cool outdoor venue, San Manuel Amphitheater, and you were an usher at a concert, so you got to really just like enjoy the concert and then like check people's tickets. It was like pretty cool. But there's all kinds of concerts, all kinds of music, and so like there was like Slipknot, Toby Keith, like country, but this guy was like drunk on stage. So imagine what the crowd was like.
Right.
So lots of different settings. I'm working with a mixture of people who were from my church and some who weren't. And but I had some like I just observing people,
Yeah.
and some of the things that people would try to do to get into like the closer areas, closer
Mhm.
to the stage. I just remember, I won't go into any details, but there was a woman who came up to me like when during the concert, and she was trying to get past me.
Yeah.
And she was just like so drunk, like
Mhm.
out of her mind drunk. And she was like offering things to me
Yeah,
to like get past. And so they were things that definitely compromised
Yeah.
my values in many ways.
Yeah.
And so what I remember in that time was just this shock of like, oh my goodness, like there are people who share very different values than I do,
Yeah.
and like what would it be like if I kind of compromised?
Mhm.
But so in that there's like a little bit of a temptation to like maybe leave some of my values behind.
Right. Because you're
And-
thinking, she doesn't know me. I don't know her. Like, no one knows. No one knows.
Exactly.
No one sees us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then there's a sense in which, like I also had this feeling, and I was pretty young at this point, but there's also this feeling of like looking down on these people as well
Mm,
because they don't
Yeah.
have different values. And in my conversations with a lot of people who are like primarily working in non-Christian environments, I've witnessed this like kind of some certain attitudes can come up, right? There is the like, oh, I'm really struggling. Like when I'm at work, I have a hard time being a Christian, quote
Mhm,
unquote, and
mhm.
like living up to what I know is true and what is right and good.
Yeah.
But then there's also other attitudes that come up, which is like one of them can be I'm like looking down on these people
Mhm.
and saying like, how can these people live this way? What are they
Mm.
thinking? Like, how can they not see that this is, and so there's this can be this superiority complex.
Mm.
That's another attitude I've seen. And another attitude I've seen is a
Mm.
victim mentality
Mm.
of like, oh my gosh, my coworkers are out to get me, my boss is out to get me, my work is like I had to do this training and they're, kind of like persecuting me because I don't hold on to what they believe in.
Yeah.
And so, some of those things can be true. I'm not saying
Yeah.
like you can't be targeted, because sometimes you are. But I've noticed that some of those things can create these attitudes, these overall attitudes and approaches to work. This struggle, this temptation, this superiority complex, and then this victimhood mentality.
Mhm.
And those are just things I've observed in the way people kind of approach. And another, I guess, approach is like, this is my community and my mission fields
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah.
So yeah, just an observation. Maybe we can dive into some of those a little bit more.
Yeah. No, those are good. those are really good. Those are definitely different key attitudes that I've also seen in people, especially I think for whatever reason, I've been seeing a lot more of like the I'm a victim more recently one. It's just really, I don't know if it's just to say it's really easy to get into that attitude, but like it's one that's pretty common that as I talk to people that they just feel this sense of they're a victim in their work environment, which I want to totally like validate. Like that could be very true and possibly happening, but I think there's also a lot of like perspective change that is healthy that needs to happen
Mhm.
as we see ourselves in the workforce, in the marketplace, because we can't and we shouldn't have everyone working in churches. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that should not be the case.
And that's not for
Right. And it's not for everyone. I think our biggest mission field, in churches here in the US is the marketplace. Like the
Mhm.
marketplace, and just when I mean by marketplace, I mean like any secular job, any job that isn't in a church is a huge mission field to reach people. To me, maybe I'm not even saying this, and I could totally admit that. But if I were working in a secular environment, I would be excited. Nuance, but I would be excited for a secular environment, so much so because I know that me just being different would cause so many conversations.
Mhm.
Because I've had those conversations be in those environments where someone will ask me, why don't you curse? Like everybody curses. Why don't you curse? And just like not participating in that opened up a conversation to my faith. Like, oh, actually, like,
Mm.
I just one of my convictions because follow God and have a relationship with Jesus is I don't curse. Like I don't think that's something I need to participate in. Oh, okay. And the conversation might end there, but it's a seed planted now, and it opens up the conversation for more. Opens up the door for more conversations in the future. So I would encourage you if you're feeling that weight or that overwhelmingness of like I'm in such a dark place. I'm like, yeah, but that means you can shine so much brighter in that place because it's such a dark place. If and this is where integrity is so important and why being the same person wherever you go is so important, because if maybe you're feeling that overwhelmingness because you're not the same person wherever you go. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed because internally you have these convictions, but you don't actually live them out. And so at work, you're one place, and at church, you're one place. And so you feel that overwhelmingness because you're like, I know I should be acting differently at work than I am, but I'm not because no one sees me from church. And so you think because no one sees you, then God doesn't see you. And that's obviously not true because God does see you. And so I would encourage you, like, what would it look like to shift the perspective and be like, maybe it's my responsibility. Maybe I'm in such a dark place because this is who God trusted to be in this place. Maybe it's you who actually needs to be there and be the light in that place instead of beating yourself up or thinking that you shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think something that what you're saying is kind of making me think of is like, if you have value in who you are, like if you know who you are and you are secure in that, you're not going to like have that victim mentality because you're not thinking, oh, I need this person, this person, this person to validate who I am. I just like,
I'm going to be.
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is who I am.
Yeah.
I'm in the process of growth, but I'm not dependent on my fellow employees or my boss to affirm who I am. Therefore, like these things don't really matter. They don't, affect me as much, which I think is interesting because my retail job, my clothing retail job at this said place, was difficult because I didn't know who I was. I was out of high school and I was just like really unsure and unaware of how to handle certain situations. And the people that I worked with were very like not only not Christian, they just were against Christianity. And so here comes this like 18, 19-year-old who is like, oh yeah, I love fashion and I love all these things. And because I was a hard worker, I got promoted into a manager sort of position. And the other manager who had taken 2.5 years to get that position hated me. It took me 5-6 months. And so that relationship was really hard, like so hard, because when she had to supervise me, I like tried to respect her, tried to, honor her, like, okay, you know what, you're my boss right now.
Yeah.
But she just hated me. And I couldn't like get past that.
Yeah.
And so I wish looking back that I had known more of who I was so that I didn't have that like victim mentality and would go home every day and think, I hate my job, but I also don't want to leave my job, Just interesting.
You know what's so interesting? Something that just, as you were talking, that I thought of is that as a believer, your identity is in Christ, right? And ideally, your identity is in Christ. And there are times where we waver from that, and sometimes it gets put in work or whatever it is. But someone who's not a believer, their identity could be in that very job. And so if you're getting promoted or if you're like excelling at your job, and they're not, or they're not getting the recognition, their whole identity might be wrapped up in their work. And so that could be what's causing like that tension that you're experiencing. And so it's like, it's on us as a believer to not take that personally, because really they're not mad at us. They're mad at the fact that their identity isn't, their validation, their affirmation isn't coming from their job. Their job isn't getting them, which it never will, what they want it to give them. And so now it's being taken out on us or on you is one, just in that specific scenario. Like, as I was like, oh man, like, identity plays into it.
Yeah. I think this is really like, it touches into a bigger question, which is like, how do we as believers interact with a world that does not believe the same as us and a culture that doesn't believe the same as us or have the same values?
Yeah.
And there historically throughout history, there have been different responses by Christians. And like one response is you withdraw from culture. You say, this is not a
I want to partake in.
They don't want to partake in what they see as unholy, as like impure, as something that would contaminate you and your faith. So that's why we have things like private Christian schools or Christian universities and
Mhm.
things like that, which there are good versions of and
Mhm.
there are negative versions
Mhm.
of, right?
Mhm.
But there's like kind of that withdrawal, keep ourselves like pure and
Mhm.
uncontaminated from the world around us.
Mhm.
And then there are others who would say like, let's create let's go into culture. There are more than this. I'm simplifying the kind of history of it, but
Mhm.
another response is let's go into culture, be in the world, but not of it, and
Mhm.
like take what is in the culture and then redeem it and give
Mhm.
it like kind of baptize it in a way and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
make it holy.
Mhm.
And so, and that's done in good and bad ways. So that's where you see like, I don't know, Christian movies that aren't always great.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're like, we want to create we want to create an alternative culture, but use the means of the culture, right?
Yeah.
Movies were not a Christian thing, but then we took them and made them. And then others would be like, let's go into it. Let's do this among non-believers,
Mhm.
but do it as unto the Lord.
Mhm.
And so there are multiple ways to approach it. But I think in each of, I think the ideal would be that wherever you go, you're carrying this bigger identity of like,
Yeah.
I am, I'm a follower of Jesus, and that means I live my life a certain way, and therefore that that impacts the way that I partake, not only in the task that I do, but
Yeah.
in the relationships I have with other people
Mm-hmm.
in this role. And so there's like, I mean, so there's a way that you can approach. In one sense, there's how do you approach the task as a believer? Maybe that's a different question than this podcast, right? That's how you approach your work. But then there's how do you approach the relationships?
Mhm.
And a lot of people's response is, okay, they're having us these relationships I have, these people don't have the same values, and therefore I want to withdraw. But that means maybe abandoning the role that in which you're able to make a big difference
Yeah.
in the community. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
let's say you're on the school board, right? At
Yep.
the local school, the school district, and a lot of these people, there's actually a lot of debate about what goes on in our school districts, but you will run into values that are
Yeah.
different than yours and people
For
who have
sure.
ideas that you do not support. And so one approach would be, I'm going to withdraw because I don't want to be, overtaken by this, contaminated by this. I don't want to be surrounded by this and all these things. Another approach would be, I'm going to stay here because if I'm not here, then that's a follower of Jesus who is not here influencing
Yeah.
our school district and
Right.
like making choices that could make a difference.
Yeah.
Right. And so there are these different approaches, but they have different kind of effects. I'm not saying you should never withdraw, because I think sometimes that could be wise.
Yeah.
I think what I'm trying to say though is that sometimes our reaction to run actually is a defeat. And we really should hold our ground. And that doesn't mean that we like are fighting the people around us, right? But that means we're representing Jesus in our relationships, even with the people that we view as like very different than us.
Mhm.
Maybe even I was going to avoid this word, but I think we should probably use this. Some people that we see as our enemies, like
Mhm.
in the culture, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus says to love your enemies, and you can love someone who opposes you on a certain policy at work or opposes you on a certain task and decision while showing Jesus to them.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, that person is made in the image of God, just as you are, right? And so I think we as believers and followers of Jesus have probably the greater responsibility to not let work stuff get in the way of the relationship with your coworkers. Even if they don't have the same values as you do. I think of one of my leaders, Gabe, who's a barber, and works in a barber shop. And barbershops tend to be pretty secular environments, and depending on which barbershop you're going to. And I admire the way he like is still present in his shop, and all the guys know he's a believer now. And that's cool because they have seen him go through the transformation of how he used to be to becoming a believer and to now being a committed disciple and growing and helping make disciples. And so they've seen the change in him, and they don't interact with him in the same way that they used to. He doesn't interact in the same way that he used to. But he's such a light in that shop. And I tell him all the time, like, man, like you are in such a dark environment, but you are shining. Like the fact that you are taking your faith seriously and you're committed to it. And it's not like he's cut them off or anything like that. Like still has relationships with a lot of them. And one of them was his barber mentor, like taught him how to cut hair, and owns a shop, and he's, they're still close. But it's different now. But he hasn't allowed his convictions to he hasn't allowed his convictions to over rule his compassion for people. I think if our theology leads to not loving people, our theology probably hasn't started in the correct place.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that also makes me think, like, so I had a friend who he worked in a bagel shop.
I
love bagels.
Bagels are good.
Yep. Cream cheese, jalapeno cheddar.
Next week's
bagel.
episode, bagels.
Yeah,
Drop down in the comments what your favorite bagel is.
So bagels. He was working, and I don't think any of his coworkers were believers. But he was just chill. He was just being himself, making bagels.
Yeah.
Like doing his job.
Doing his job well.
And building like relationships with people who had different views on sexuality, different views on the way the world works, different views on politics, different views on all these things. And he just like loved them, responded to them with kindness, with gentleness, with generosity, all these things.
Yeah.
And in his conversations with them, these people who like even were opposed to Christianity were like, oh, I didn't know Christians could be like this. Oh, I didn't know, like, wow, you're actually like pretty chill. I wasn't expecting this when I heard you're a Christian,
Yeah.
And what a beautiful thing to be able to rewrite the story of what the culture's impression of Christianity is. To say like, hey, maybe someone has misrepresented Jesus to you, and I can show you that Jesus is not that way.
Yeah.
And doing that by remaining loving, maintaining your identity of loving God, loving others, rather than saying, I'm going to fight this cultural battle, which doesn't mean you never say your opinion or like what you think is the truth, but it means doing that in like a loving way. And in doing that, yes, you might still get opposition. You might still get, rejection. You might still get people coming after you, but also you might so beautifully rewrite the wrong impression that people have had, shining that light. Right. But you're not going to do that usually. I mean, sometimes that does mean you stand on a principle.
Yeah.
Right. You stand on it. You say, sorry, this is something I cannot compromise. I won't budge from this. But sometimes
you don't have to do it arrogantly.
You don't have to do it arrogantly, for sure. And maybe we could talk about what that looks like.
Yeah.
But it could also mean you say, hey, look, we disagree on this, and I'm still going to love you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to speak my opinion to you, but I'm going to do it in a loving way and in the context of relationship. Because usually if you don't have a relationship, they're not going to like really value what you're going to say anyways.
Yeah.
But I always loved talking to my friend who worked in the bagel shop, because he always had these like interactions, and he's representing Jesus making bagels.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did you have some thoughts? Because
I have so many thoughts.
Go.
I think so. The verse that was coming to mind was Matthew 5:16, which says, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven."
Come on now.
And so I was thinking about like how in any workplace you come across people who, like you were saying, have different opposing views, or just disagree, or just don't, have had church hurt or whatever. So they're just like, I hate Christians. I hate Christianity. And the minute they find out that you're a Christian, they immediately start treating you differently. And I've talked to a lot of people that have worked in situations where they've been hurt like over and over. They have been like, just honestly, like, for lack of a better word, like abused by these people just because they're a Christian and what they claim to believe. And I think the most impactful thing that we as believers can do is the good works. It's not like, oh, you disagree with this political view. Well, here's why my standpoint is more important. And this is what God says. And this is what, we're supposed to believe. It's like sometimes it's just asking a question of, why do you believe what you believe? And that's showing the most love.
Yeah.
It's not proving that you're right.
Yeah.
And I think like we, one, have to be really humble, and two, know that your actions, like you were sharing with your friend Gabe,
Mhm.
like his actions, his
Yeah.
character, his responses, his reactions
Mhm.
changed
Mhm.
when he came to know Christ.
Yeah.
And so if our good works, our attitudes, our actions, our generosity, our humility, if all of those things are like flowing, it's
Mhm.
like you don't even have to
Yeah.
verbally say, I'm a
Convince.
Christian
Yeah.
and I believe this, this, and this. They'll know you by your
It
works.
works. Yep.
And I think, and I know I've struggled with this, but like I almost downplay the fact that my generosity could show someone Jesus.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
me sacrificing something for me to help benefit you
Yeah.
could actually express Jesus's love in a way that words could never do.
Yeah.
And we underplay the power of our good works. And so
Mhm.
I think like in the secular workplace, anyone who works there in any place, no matter what sphere, healthcare, education, government, like anywhere you are, it should be met with like they'll know you by your good work, by
Yeah.
your fruit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you don't have fruit and you're just trying to prove that people need to be a Christian and I disagree with you, but you know what, I'll still love you.
Mhm.
That's not love.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just by saying I disagree and I'll love you from afar. That's
Mhm.
not love. I
Mhm.
think we need to redefine what love is,
Mhm.
So I think, yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that's beautiful, and that leads to deeper relationship where you
Mhm.
can make a more impact, a greater impact than if
Mhm.
you were to just like come in with bulldozing truth,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we see Jesus do this all the time, right? He was constantly criticized for spending time with people who
Mhm.
were not like accepted by the believing community,
Mhm.
and the people who were sinners, the people who had different views on all these things. But what he would do is he would make connections with them. He
Mhm.
would eat
Mm.
with them. He would
Mhm.
see them. He would hear them. He would spend time with them, and then he would speak truth to them. But only after those connections were made.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a beautiful like potential that we can think of is by taking this approach, saying my actions, I'm representing Jesus in everything that I do. My actions, all these things. Really my goal is to build these friendships and relationships to make to help that person feel comfortable.
Mm.
And then in that sense, that relationship is more meaningful for me to be able to, when I speak my opinion, my perspective, my things, my values, it's in the context of relationship. And so the potential for misunderstanding, the potential for offense, the potential for all these things is lessened because you know each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
Like I know that you love me, so I know when you say you disagree with me that you're not saying you don't love me, right?
Mhm.
Because we've already have this bedrock of relationship. And in my opinion, I think that's a very fruitful way to
Mhm.
approach these things. Because
Mhm.
if you come in and just with that bulldozing truth, it's going to cut off the relationship at the beginning,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then that's what's going to create this like hostile work environment or this awkward work environment. And sometimes maybe we're the ones who are hostile.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's what we need to admit too. But sometimes we can go in with this anti coworker,
Yeah.
Yeah.
mentality,
Mhm.
and yeah.
I think one thing that we do as well is we go into our workplace and we have this attitude that like this underlying motive that I'm going to save you
Mm.
or like I'm going to lead
Yeah.
you to Jesus
Yep.
and you're going to make it to heaven now and that's
Because I'm here.
because I'm here
Yeah.
and God sent me.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you know what? God has you placed in your workplace
Mhm.
for a reason,
Mhm.
and there's a very special,
Mhm.
specific reason, but you're not God.
Yeah.
You can't save
Right.
people. And if you go into wanting to build that relationship to further show them that they're loved, that they're seen, that, that relationship exists there's possibility and potential to have this
Yeah.
relationship with Jesus. Like if you go in with that motive that I'm going to save you, they can like people sense that.
Yeah.
I know when someone on the street corner is coming up to me because they have an agenda.
Yeah.
And I think it's like we need to be so careful that like Jesus had an agenda, but he didn't sneakily go about it.
Mhm.
He was just who he was and he freely loved and he gave and he spoke truth in a gentle and kind way, but he also cared about the person and their
Mm.
story. And I think we just so quickly like just have this hidden agenda and
Yeah.
people know like,
Mhm.
Yeah.
there's this sixth sense. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
think the agenda is to love.
Mm.
And to love
Mm.
and to love someone, to seek that person's well-being and benefit
Mm.
means knowing when is the right time and when is not the right time
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
to preach the gospel, to like all
Right,
these things,
right.
you know.
Mhm.
And yeah. I'm just thinking of like, it reminds me of recently I had the opportunity of joining one of my youth students at their school for a school field trip as a chaperone.
Nice.
The Six Flags was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So it
That's
started out
sick.
at the
Yeah.
student's school, and we were eating dinner in the cafeteria. So I was a youth pastor in the cafeteria with a bunch of graduating seniors.
Yeah.
Wow.
Eating dinner.
That's
Cool.
awesome.
And it was like, I loved it so much. But I was just like, man, I know people who were, if they were in this situation, would be like, oh, look at these kids. Oh, they're cussing
Yeah,
over here. They're
right.
doing all this over
Yep.
here, all this stuff.
Yep.
But,
Yeah.
but throughout the thing, I could have approached that with like I'm going to save all these students, right? I'm
Yeah.
the youth pastor. I'm going
Right.
to preach the gospel, right? But
Get up in the middle of the cafeteria, start preaching.
Yeah. Here. I've got something to say.
Sinners.
Oh my
Sinners.
God.
So
That's what not to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
what I realized was like, first of all, when people realized I was the youth pastor, and some of them, I had already met some of them before, but they would be like, they would cuss and they'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm
Yeah,
so sorry. And I was like, don't worry, be yourself, like whatever. You don't have to like,
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about, I'm not going to judge you, all these
Right.
things. But what throughout the night, what I got to experience was, I'm coming in as a chaperone here to
Yeah.
bless them, right? Really, so my student and her group of friends were like so welcoming and inviting and like kind and generous. I was expecting to just go and like kind of be in the background.
Yeah.
And like be in the back, but they invited me into the night. Anyways, sorry, I'm getting into too much detail. What I realized from these students, that some people will come in with certain mindset towards them,
Mm.
is that I had so much to learn from them and to be blessed by them through, right? Like I thought I was gonna come and bless them, and I think I did, but really, like I received so much blessing from them by
Mm.
being welcoming, opening, and loving.
Yeah.
And you know what? They knew I was a youth pastor. They asked me some questions about Christianity, and we had a really chill conversation. And you know what? I think it will lead to further conversations in the future.
Yeah.
If anything, they were able to meet a guy who loves Jesus
Mm.
and who loved them as
Yeah.
well.
Mm.
And I think that we all have that potential,
Yeah.
no matter what job we work in,
Yeah. Pastor Galen said this really cool quote at our Equip conference, youth conference back in March. He said something to the effect of it's not about conversions, but it's about conversations.
Yeah.
And on average, I don't know where he pulled the stat from, but I'm going to trust that it's accurate. That on average it takes about 30 conversations before someone puts their faith in Jesus. So
Wow.
he was just basically telling the students, encouraging the students and leaders that it's not about converting them off that first conversation. Just have a conversation with them.
Mm.
Have a conversation with them. And I man, you guys are saying such great stuff. I was just thinking in my heart, just like, could it be that the next revival, the next just turning back to Jesus doesn't come from people coming to church, but it comes from us going into the marketplace and genuinely being those lights in the dark places, and genuinely seeing people where they're at, genuinely meeting people where they're at, genuinely loving people where they're at, connecting with them, doing what Jesus did on a very authentic level, in a way that's not trying to push an agenda, but it's just trying to push, and not trying to really push anything, but just show a love that is different from anything they've ever experienced. Could it be that when we start doing that intentionally, collectively, that then we will see a revival, because it will come in the darkest of places where light shines the brightest? Is what I was thinking when you guys were, as you guys were chatting.
That's so good. And there's so much in scripture that informs and supports this, because so much of scripture is about the people of God in places that are hostile to the faith.
Mhm.
The whole New Testament, the people of God are a minority community in a group that is hostile to the faith.
Daniel in Babylon, Jonah in Nineveh.
Mhm. Right. You go to the Old Testament and you read Jeremiah. Jeremiah's talking to the Israelites who have been taken, like Daniel, taken out of Israel, out of Judah, and into this completely foreign nation, and said, you now must live, work, and worship in these spaces. And they had to figure out how to do that. So read some of the prophets, read the New Testament, like Paul.
Israelites in Egypt.
In Egypt, yeah. Israel or Paul in the New Testament is constantly talking to believers who are not the majority. They don't have power in the places that they're living and working and being in. He's talking to like communities of believers that are made up of city workers, that are made up of some soldiers and ex-soldiers, of made up of women, of made up of that's made up of slaves who have to go back and serve their masters. And he's saying, here's how you live and follow Jesus in a world where you like it's not Eden, right?
Yeah.
It's not the Garden of Eden. It's something very different. And so we didn't dive into a lot of that, but there's so much that you could dive into that informs the way that you live and work.
Yeah, this is just to start the conversation.
Yeah, there's
Just to start.
Yeah.
Is there one practical thing that you would share with our viewers or listeners, something that they could apply like today, tomorrow when they go to work? It's a helpful tip.
Question. It's a good question. I would say, I don't know how practical this is, but I would say it starts with a perspective change, perspective switch. It starts by identifying what your assumption is going into work, what your expectation is. Like, are you expecting to be in a Christian environment even though you're in a secular environment? Or are you like, what is your expectation? I think you start there. You start with your expectation, with your assumptions, with your motive, and then you can begin to align those to maybe changing them to something different. Changing your perspective from I'm here to convert to I'm here to love, or from I'm here to be the strong, brave Christian to let me just meet these people where they're at and do my job well.
Yeah.
So I think
self-assessment.
Yeah, self-assessment. Yeah.
That's good.
That's good.
Like that makes me think even like if people believe very differently than we do, if they don't believe in God or they believe in a different God, they have different values, then we really shouldn't expect them to live out the way that we would want them to, right? And so that affects our perspective and our expectations.
You're able to let go.
It's really good.
Like,
Yeah, let go. And so my kind of practical suggestion would be, and this idea has changed my life and relationships. So I would say this in so much more than just this situation, but I would suggest ask more questions. Ask more questions. I would say start with questions. Before you ever make a statement, give a question.
That's so
and be open. That a question is unless it's like a trick question, whatever. But like a question is almost like inherently a humbling position to take. You are seeking something you do not have. You're seeking understanding. You're seeking perspective. You're seeking an answer you do not have. And so that humility, I think, will open up so much to potential relationships and love and intimacy with the people around you. And so ask questions. Oh, you think we should do this? Okay, why? Tell me, help me understand a little bit more where you're coming from. Oh, you have a problem with this? Well, can I ask you why?
Yeah.
Or like what happened? Or, or what do you think about this?
Yeah.
This, and before you even share your own thing, what do you think about this situation or this perspective? You'll come across things you disagree with, but even in the things you disagree with, you may learn something.
Yeah.
If anything, you will establish a connection with someone. So ask questions is my practical
I love that.
suggestion.
So good. Mine would probably be to talk to other Christians who are in the workplace.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to be your workplace, but even at your one of your churches or the church that you go to, just kind of ask different people like, hey, how do you represent your faith well in your setting at work? And how do you have any advice for me? Like whether you're just starting out at a job or you've been at one and you just are really unsure how to integrate your faith into your workplace. I think asking other people what their story is and how they do it is a great way to learn. And people have been doing this for a long time. So, and that might also help challenge other people who haven't thought about this to do it. So, but yeah, hopefully this episode was helpful. Please leave any questions, comments, feedback below. We love hearing from you guys. And so please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for topics that you want us to talk about or cover, feel free to also message us on Instagram or Facebook. And we would love to cater to that. But until next time, hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.